scoot down a little bit. These four back here, I think, are gonna heckle. Dave's here. We can start now. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here. Happy to see y'all. I really hope that you read ahead of time. We're hopefully going to get to some more discussion today than we have. I actually told my wife that I reoriented this to make sure I get to some discussion, being that the last couple of classes I have not. But that's okay. I do appreciate y'all sticking with me and nerding out with me for the last couple of classes. Just to reiterate, I got several requests through the app, but if you guys would like slides, if you go into the, what is it called, Church Center app, and you request access to the class, it'll add you, and then every Sunday I've been uploading the slides, and I'm going to upload some other resource material and stuff like that in there as well as we go. Let's go to God in prayer before we begin this morning. Father, thank you so much for this day. We thank you for the wonderful, wonderful sunshine that we have. We thank you for the opportunity to fellowship, the opportunity to grow together, to open up your word, discuss it. And we ask that as we do so, that we first and foremost hear what you mean to say, and then we find out how to apply it and how to live it out. Father, in all that we do, we ask that we bring glory to you, that we are humble, and that we point others towards your Son. Thank you so much for the sacrifice he gives. Through Christ's name, amen. Amen. All right. So I wanted to start with having you guys do an imaginal experience. Imagine standing near a furnace, right? Anyone probably can guess where we're going if you were in your last class. Imagine standing near a furnace so hot that it burns without touching it. Imagine the intensity is so hot that it feels like you're baking even though you're not actually touching or putting anything in the furnace. The heat presses like invisible hands against you, smoke fills the lungs, and it begins to become more and more difficult to breathe as you stand near this furnace. And before you stands a choice that this furnace represents. The choice is you either comply or you go in to that furnace. And this is the choice. This is the intensity. This is the emotional situation that Daniel, his friends, and all of those that were brought into exile faced with King Nebuchadnezzar. If you remember last week, we talked about the statue, and King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream, and the statue represented the kingdoms of the world, and he was the golden head, right? The Babylonian Empire, his kingdom was that golden head. And King Nebuchadnezzar sees this, and he understands what's at stake, and then he seems to react. But then one chapter later, one of the things we see is he gets, pun intended, a big head, doesn't he? He gets kind of full of himself at that point.
He's not humble.
He's not humble. But we see this intensity of the furnace framing this chapter. In this chapter, we see a decision, a crucial decision, and we see these decisions take place throughout the book of Daniel. But here we see this crucial decision where we have to decide, are we going to do what's convenient or are we going to do what's difficult? We have to decide, are we going to do, and they have to decide, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have to decide, are they going to do what is convenient and spares them, or what is inconvenient, difficult, and potentially causes them to lose their life? I believe this story invites us to reflect on our own readiness when we're faced with pressure and heat, so to speak, from the culture, about whether we do what's easy or we do what's difficult and may result in negative consequences. But let's look in Daniel chapter 3. So in Daniel chapter 3, we see the early part of this begin to set the stage for what's going on. In the first 7 verses, we see now that King Nebuchadnezzar has he's gotten a big head. He's gotten full of himself. He's not very humble anymore. And if you look in chapter 2, let's actually go backwards. Chapter 2, I didn't have this in my notes, but I think this is important. In chapter 2, verse 46, then King Nebuchadnezzar fell upon his face and paid homage to Daniel, and commanded that the offering and incense be offered up to him. The king answered and said to Daniel, truly your God is God of gods, and Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries. For you have been able to reveal this mystery. Then the king gave Daniel high honors and many great gifts, and made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon. And Daniel made a request of the king in verse 49. And who else was promoted? His 3 amigos, right? His 3 friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They get promoted. So all of this takes place. And then there's a side note that Daniel remains in the king's court. Daniel serves the king. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they're not in the king's court per se, but Daniel is, which that becomes very important as the story goes in following chapters. But then we get into chapter 3. I don't know how much time has passed, but time has passed. We sometimes forget things, don't we? And by the way, it doesn't mean that, King Nebuchadnezzar didn't just decide that I'm no longer polytheistic, right? He didn't say that. He just says, look, your God is the God of gods, right? He didn't denounce all the other gods. But he forgets something. He forgets the meaning of the statue. And then in chapter 3, verse 1, King Nebuchadnezzar, he then makes an image of gold whose height was 60 cubits and its breadth was 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura and in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent to gather the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, and counselors, treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And so what does he do? He starts by creating this large, what? Statue, thank you. I was like, it's right there, you can cheat. It's okay to cheat. He sets this up on the plain of Dura. Where is Dura? We don't really know. There's 3 ideas of where it might be. But if you look at the zoomed in part, which didn't really zoom very well because it got super pixelated here, it's really right up here. Here's Babylon. Here's where Shinar and Babel is believed to be. Plain of Dura is right around that area. So he creates this large statue, and he asks all of them to come to its dedication ceremony. And this is huge, right? This is a huge statue. So as he sets this up, as they come, then the satraps, the prefects, the governors in verse 3, the counselors, the treasurers, so all these people, all the officials of the provinces gather for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And they stood before the image that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And the herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded." It's not just suggested, right? You were commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, I love that they put like any kind of music in there, right? You are to fall down and worship the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And then look what it does. And I love the writing in Daniel because it really kind of sets the intensity of this, right? Because it doesn't just say, you're commanded to do this, and then Daniel doesn't do it, right? It says, and then here's what happens if you don't do it. So it builds. Whoever does not, in verse 6, fall down and worship shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. Therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, basically all this music stuff, all the peoples, the nations, and languages fell down and worshiped the golden image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Now, we're going to find out there's some exceptions to this, right? Even though Daniel's not named, I believe Daniel is one of the exceptions, and we know that his 3 friends are exceptions to this. But King Nebuchadnezzar, he sets up a statue in Dura. He calls everyone to it, and he says, look, this thing is so big, this thing is so huge. What is he essentially saying? I am the representative of God. Right? And because of that, you are going to worship an image, an idol of me. And so he sets this up. And as we look at this worship, we look at a king who has forgotten about the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and Daniel. He has forgotten about the prediction. Isn't it interesting? His downfall was predicted, not necessarily him, but the kingdom. So it makes me wonder, is he doing this in order to prevent that, or is he doing this because he forgot about that? But he has been shown and demonstrated the statue. He accepts it in chapter 2, doesn't he? But by this point, he's like, you know what? I got this. We see this happen often with the kings in Babylon, right? I got this. This is mine. The golden statue symbolized not just pride, but it's really rebellion against God as the God of gods, right? It's the idea that it doesn't matter. And he wasn't saying deny all your other gods. Babylon was much like Rome. They're okay with bringing in and incorporating other gods as long as it doesn't like contest or go at heads with the others, right? But he says, I'm going to now be essentially your God. You're going to worship me. You're going to bow down to me. And what began as recognition of God in chapter 2 and God's power, it turns into ultimately, we'll see to ruin in chapter 4, right? So you see the progression that takes place? We see people carted off, God working, God doing great things through Daniel and his friends. And then we see acknowledgement of that. And oh man, as imagine reading this for the first time. Most of us have probably read through Daniel a couple of times in our life. But imagine reading this for the first time and you're sitting here thinking, oh man, God's doing great. Oh, this is great. This whole kingdom, maybe they're turning to God, whatever it might be. It's a positive note. And then all of a sudden you get to chapter 3. And you're like, King, what is wrong with you? How many times do we do that though? I often wonder if God sits up there looking down on us going, oh my gosh, Josh, we just talked about this. What is wrong with you? If you ever seen the old cartoon King of the Hill, that boy ain't right. What is wrong? I mean, we give King Nebuchadnezzar a hard time, and we may not be asking everyone to bow down to us. But how often do we say, okay, God, I get it. I'm going to make this about you. And then all of a sudden we become egocentric again. It becomes about me, right? I get it, God. I know church is about bringing in the unchurched. I know it's not about my preferences. It's about God's preferences and all this. But we get it. We know that. But then how often do we start making it back about us? Well, I want it my way. We'll go to Burger King. Does everyone get that, right? Do they still have that in their commercials? So those are the old commercials. I don't know what it is now. But so anyway, so as we talk about this humongous statue and the dominance and authority that it demonstrates, this also ties in not only to faithfulness we'll see, but this ties in also to the sovereignty of God that we're going to see as it plays out. So whenever we think of these compromises, this pressure that we're given, right? Either bow or be thrown in the fire. What pressure do we experience today? I already named a few, right? Like the pressure to make things, including worship, about me. But what pressures do we experience today? Maybe we don't. If you don't, that's amazing. No modern pressures tempt us to compromise our convictions.
Josh, I would say like the one that I've seen the most just around Christianity is the the pressure to like to be a church for everyone,
Mhm.
but also to accept the actions of everyone as well, and if you don't do that, you're considered a hateful church. When in reality, like you're just following the Bible.
Yeah. So be a church for everyone and accept the actions, regardless of what Scripture says, right? Absolutely, and we see that. And we see churches giving in to that more and more. And by the way, we can stand firm in the faith without being jerks about it too. I just want to clarify that. Melissa?
I think a big one is to be deceptive. I think a lot of people lie, and a lot of people know everybody lies, and you should just lie too. And it takes character and heart to be integrity and to have it within yourself, even if no one else knows. Like just to really honesty, like that's just so prevalent to be deceitful and lie. And
It is. I mean, I'll step on my toes and everyone else's toes. What's the number one question we ask each other? How's it going? What's the number one answer we get? Oh, it's going good. Really? Actually, I heard, not to diminish that, I think that's a really great point, but that made me think of, I heard this really great thing about when you ask someone questions, don't ask, how are you, how's it going? Because that demonstrates that we don't really care. We just want to get past that niceties. Ask, hey, if you want to go positive, hey, what have you been working on that's really exciting you? Stuff like that, right? Those kinds of questions, that it's like the deeper conversation. And by the way, people who do that tend to be people who connect really well with others. But yeah, any other pressures?
I think there's a lot of pressure to, or maybe just not even pressure is the right word, but temptation to pursue whatever makes us happy or brings us pleasure, and I think that there's a lot of, our culture is very centered around that it's what's most important is what pleases you and what you want.
Yeah, so whatever makes us happy and kind of centering around what makes, and how many, here's a pressure, whatever makes our children or grandchildren happy. There is a really great book that is, I could have told you the author of it until I started talking about it. But there's a book that talks about this idea that God doesn't call you to be happy, He calls you to be holy. And there's a difference, right? Happiness is fleeting. And I know we can talk about happiness versus joy, right? I'm not getting into that. But that is a big one in our culture. It's about me. It's about me being happy, about me or my kids or whatever it is. And I mean, how many people go broke being happy, right? Anyway, I'm off track. I want to talk about this. Whenever we talk about this, first set of 7 verses, even after witnessing the power of God, we see that pride, not just in King Nebuchadnezzar's life, but pride can harden our hearts too, right? If we're not careful, if we're not reminded. One thing I love about doing communion every Sunday, it's a good reminder that hopefully helps us maintain humility. It's a good reminder of what it cost for us to be where we're at. It's a good recommittal ceremony, if you will, every Sunday. And so even after witnessing the power of God, we have to, what's that saying, be on our P's and Q's, is that what it is? So that we're careful that we don't well up with pride. But then let's see what happens in the next set of verses here, because we do see that there are a few who remain faithful to God. And so in verse 8, therefore, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. Maliciously. It wasn't an observational, right? They had a purpose in this. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever." So they're sucking up to him. "You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, blah, 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 shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down, remember, king, and worship, shall be cast in the burning fiery furnace." Right? They're like, "Oh, king, live forever. Here's what you said. However, in verse 12, there are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Are you sensing any jealousy here? These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you set up. I mean, that's true, I guess, right? Well, what do they come in? They come in and they say, look, king, here's what you said, but there's 3 people. I love that they start out with the Jews, and then they go, but specifically, here's 3 people. I do wonder why Daniel wasn't mentioned in this. I wonder if it's because Daniel was the king's right-hand man, so to speak. And so they're like, yeah, we can't touch Daniel on this, but man, we can touch his friends because they're outside of the... Anyway, you know, we see here that whenever you get faced with decisions and difficult decisions, it kind of tells us what we're made of, doesn't it? And when we do the right thing, people might complain. There might be consequences. Doing the right thing is not always easy. I tell that to my kids. My parents told me that. Hopefully you have told that to people. It's not always easy, but it's still the right thing to do. Interestingly, if you remember all the way back, the Babylonian names of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, right, they're honoring the gods. But even though their names stay in that their new names are what we read throughout the rest of Daniel, their Hebrew names are how they act, isn't it? Those names that honor the God of heaven. Hananiah, God is gracious. Mishael, who is what God is. Azariah, God has helped. Now that really becomes important when we see him standing in the furnace, doesn't it? I think that's awesome. These 3 in the face of the threat of going into the furnace. And notice, I don't think they stood. There is nothing in here indicating they went with a bullhorn and picket signs and stood at the image and said, "We will not bow." Anyone read that in there? I didn't. Maybe it's in the New Living Translation or something. But I don't know what they did. But the king was not aware. And then they decided to be faithful. I love this quote. One of my favorite authors is Stanley Grenz. My favorite book by Stanley Grenz is Theology for a Community of God. But he is one of my favorite biblical theologian authors, that is. And he says this: their friendship fortified their faith. Together they stood stronger than any of them could have stood alone. You think there's truth to that in our lives?
Yes.
You think maybe part of doing church together, doing life together, having small groups, worshiping together, doing Bible classes, do you think in part, maybe it's not only about head knowledge, it's about standing strong together, being rekindled, being supported, right? I'm not saying head knowledge is bad, but head knowledge without that community makes us silos, doesn't it? And we fall. I'm playing a dumb little game on my phone. It's a war game where you like slowly start taking over empires and stuff, you know, because I'm rebuilding Babylon. No, I'm joking. But if you've ever like done something like that, or you've played Risk, the board game, stuff like that, right? You can't be on your own because you've got to like create alliances and things. And so their friendship, their connectedness, allow them to stand strong. And we're going to say allow them to stand strong in the midst of the furnace.
Josh,
Yeah.
It reminds me of the
Oh, I'm
verse,
sorry,
"A
Chris.
cord of 3 strands is not easily
Yes.
broken."
Yeah, absolutely. It's, you know, by the way, that made me think of, you guys heard the, you become the sum of your 5 closest friends?
Yes.
Who are your 5 closest friends? Hopefully, they're strong in the faith. Okay, man, I just answered my question. That's okay, let me ask it and maybe you'll have some other insight. How can Christian communities strengthen our resolve when the heat is on? Like my play on words throughout these questions. How can, or I know I said it, but what are other things if you have anything else?
You just mentioned it, there's always strength in numbers, and so, the more people that you have to, I don't say prove is not the right word, but do you know what I'm saying, just share that this is what the word says. We're not trying to push this on you, it's just this is what we're following. But I think the more people, a non-Christian hears that it's not just you, there's a whole church,
Yeah,
there's that strength in that.
strength in the numbers. And it's easier to stand when you are not the only one, right? Now we need to stand if we are the only one. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. But isn't it a blessing that we've been given a community where we, even if we physically can't see each other, we know we are not the only ones standing true. By the way, I know y'all may not do this. Do you guys, okay, the front row here. Do y'all ever pick up the phone and talk to anyone, or do you only do texting? Okay, I was just curious. I have so many clients who are like, pick up the phone? What do you mean pick up the phone? They only text, and I didn't know, anyway.
That's just someone who doesn't know how to talk.
So I say that to say, we're only a phone call away. I just didn't know if that was gonna be relevant, or a text message away, but we're only a phone call away from each other.
That's exactly what he's talking about.
So faith often means, it doesn't mean, we may not always have everyone around us. But faith often means standing alone, and I put alone in quotes, because we're never alone. We have God, and we have the spiritual support of each other. But it often means maybe when you're at work, maybe when you're in the community, maybe when you're at home, if you're not from a Christian home, faith often means standing alone when everybody else bows. It means maybe you're standing alone when everybody else is in the me culture, right? And we start saying it's not about me, it's about we. But then we get into the next set here where we actually get some heat put on us. We get tested, right? The fiery furnace. Therefore, at the certain time, oh, I am in the wrong verse here. 13. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought to him. So they brought these men before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up?" By the way, he was okay with this a chapter before, wasn't he? Yeah. Okay, verse 15. Now if you are ready, when you hear the sound of all these things, if you're ready to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? I love that he says that. I think God goes, ooh, here's my opportunity. Right? It's like, I got this. Interesting choice of words, King Neb, right? And so Nebuchadnezzar, he tells him, you have one more chance. In fact, come here, bugle boy, play it in their ear so they don't say I didn't hear it, right? You have one more chance. And then he says, if you bow down, that's great. We're going to forget this whole thing happened. You're just going to go on about your day, and then I can let those people come that are complaining and say, nope, they did it. You just didn't see him doing it, right? He says, well and good. But if you don't do it, then there is not a God who can help you, right? And look what happens in verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they say to the king, never, you're a horrible king. I can't believe you would ask us for this. Right? They pull out their picket signs and they start doing political campaigns against the king and, all this other stuff. No, what is it? What do they say? Look, king, we have no need to answer you in this matter. what are they saying? And by the way, when you read this, it's not like a hateful response. They're just saying, look, we what do we say? We have no answer. We're not, what are they saying? We are not going to bow down. We can't do it. If this be so, our God, in other words, look, we can't do this, but if this happens, if you throw us in the furnace, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace. By the way, notice what they said. He is able to do so. And he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. He is able to deliver us from the furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand. Now, out of your hand, it doesn't necessarily mean out of the furnace, does it? But if not, and this is where they note that, right? But if not, be it known to you, O king, we're not going to serve your gods or worship your golden image that you have set up. Oh, this king doesn't play around. Do you remember back to class 1 about this is a war hero? This guy has seen and done some stuff, you know? There are people, remember all the magicians and everyone, they were terrified to go before the king when the king demanded they tell him about the dream. And here we are with these 3 friends saying, King, I don't know what you want us to say. If you choose to throw us in the furnace, okay, so be it. Our God can deliver us. But even if he chooses not to do that, I still can't worship and bow down. Whew, talk about faith. I don't know about you, but I've never been put in that predicament. I know of stories of people who have, not necessarily the furnace, right? But, whew, what a rough position to be in. God's presence, one thing they understood is the presence of God is greater than the outcome of the situation. The presence of God is greater than whatever outcome might happen. One person said, outcome should not define loyalty. The character of God should. I thought that was great. In fact, I probably should have put it on the PowerPoint. Look what Tim Keller. Anyone know who Tim Keller is? He passed away. But Tim Keller was a prolific writer and preacher. He says, faith is not believing in God in spite of evidence, but obeying God in spite of the consequences. That hit anyone pretty powerfully like it hit me? Faith is not believing in God in spite of evidence. We don't have a blind faith, guys. We have tons of evidence for our faith. Not just in Scripture, but in the world, right? It's obeying God in spite of the consequences. There are times in life that the consequences of obeying God may create chaos in our life, the way we see it, right? That obeying God may lead us to a really difficult work situation. Obeying God may lead us to lose something that we love and hold dear. Obeying God may lead to the consequence of somebody not liking us, right? But our faith holds us. And I like this too. As I was thinking about this class, I thought of this. Sometimes we forget that just because we think God should rescue us, that doesn't mean he will. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego understood that. Is it worded weird? Is that, you look like you're, okay, I was like that, I may have worded that weird. God doesn't live up to he doesn't have to live up to our expectation. We live up to his expectation. Just because we think God should do it doesn't mean God will do it. Remember Paul? What does Paul say? He prays and he asks God repeatedly for the thorn, whatever the thorn in the flesh was, right? For the thorn to be taken from him. And what does God say? My grace is sufficient for you. Job loses everything, and I'm meaning everything. His friends are I mean, his friends become jerks. I mean, his wife. Look, by the standard of his wife, Katie is an angel. What does his wife say? Just curse God and die. What kind of life insurance policy did he have? You know what I'm saying? But I'm getting a skeptical look from my wife right now. She's like, "Where are you going with this?" But did God save Job from any of that heartache? No. Did Job think God should have? Yeah. Remember the last couple of statements Job makes? And then what does God say? Paul gets an answer. Job doesn't. Job's answer is, suck it up, buttercup. Who do you think you are? Did you create the heavens? Did you place the stars in? Right, so I love the book of Job. Oh, it is such a good book. But just because we think that God should rescue us, it doesn't mean that he's going to do so. They knew God could deliver him, but they acknowledged God may choose not to deliver him. And they made their choice to follow him faithfully anyway. True faith trusts God regardless of the outcome. True faith trusts God regardless of the outcome. So then we see in verses 19 through 25, we see here that they're thrown in. Not only are they thrown in, but they make it 7 times hotter, which the idea of this is, it's believed, right, the 7 is the perfect number. So most scholars believe what this means is they made it to its max capacity of heat, right, which is rarely ever done back in those days. And so they make it 7 times hotter, and then what happens? They get thrown in, right? We know the story. What happens? You can cheat and skim.
They walk around that long.
Yeah. I love it, right? They're we don't have time to read it, but yeah, so all of a sudden, like, it's 7 times hotter. They throw him in the fire, and then all of a sudden, King Neb, he looks. So the way this was built, do I have a slide on this? So Babylonian furnaces, they would reach, it's believed, up to 1800 degrees Fahrenheit at its peak capacity, capable of instantly incinerating a human. And so these were often, I have a lot of needless detail about what they looked like, but there was often a viewing window or door of some sort in it. So that explains, the king didn't go and open the door, right? There was some way that he could see in, and they've unearthed some of these, by the way. But at the end of the day, what happens? He looks in, and well, hold on, wait a minute. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. That math ain't mathin'. There's 4 people in there, right? And so there's 4 people in there. And it's almost like, wait, am I seeing things? And then what happens? You guys tell me the story. Because I know we all read it before coming in today, right? What happens?
3 walked out.
I'm sorry?
3 walked out.
3 walked, so they come out, right? The 3 walked out. And so the, God's presence, it's greater than the outcome. God can handle anything. We see this with Daniel in the lion's den that we're going to get to, right? We see this in so many ways throughout Daniel. Could you guys imagine what it'd be like standing in the flames? I do wonder what Shadrach, Meshach, what were they talking about? Hey man, this isn't really going how we thought it'd go, but this is kind of cool, right? I bet King Neb's going to be surprised whenever we just kind of, were they playing cards and they're, taking a sip of water? I don't know. I do imagine what was going on in their minds, right? But at the time, a key point of this is God didn't protect them from the fire. He protected them in the fire. I thought this was a great quote. He didn't protect them from it. We've talked about this in a few classes already. God doesn't protect us from things. He helps us when in the midst of it. There's a saying, God doesn't give you more than you can handle. It is drastically misused. What is the actual saying? Do you remember?
It doesn't let you be tempted beyond what you can bear.
He doesn't let you be tempted beyond what you bear. Over and over again, God gives people things that they cannot handle. Moses could not handle it, right? In fact, New Testament says when you get in a situation where you have to give a reason for your faith, so to speak, and it's beyond your capability, don't worry. The Spirit will talk. So I have this little placard at home that says, Katie, you might have to help me remember this because I had it until I started saying this. Long story short, the last part of it is God helps us handle what we've been given. Right?
He never says he doesn't give us more than we can handle. He helps us handle.
Yeah, something like that. But I think that's not where I wanted to go in this class, but that is a great theological thing we need to understand. God will give you more than you can handle without him. But he helps you handle it if he gives it to you, right? He helps you in the fire. Give me one moment here. Here's the point for this, and then we're going to very briefly next class finish this up. But God may not keep us from the fire, but he will always meet us in it if we remain faithful. And I had a great discussion that I wanted to have on that. But out of everything in this chapter, I think this is one of the really key concepts. God doesn't promise he's going to keep us from the fire in our life. But if we're faithful, he will always meet us in it. Doesn't mean we won't be consumed, but he will be there. And he will be glorified, right? And so as you go throughout this week, ask yourself, what fires do I have? What fires am I facing? What pressures am I coming up against that I need to pray and ask God, not necessarily to deliver me from it, and there's nothing wrong with asking for that, but asking God, if you're not going to deliver me from it, please walk through it with me. I want to challenge you to do that and challenge you to tell others that God is there for them too. He will walk through it with them if they will just come to him. Thank y'all. We will finish this out and go into chapter 4 in next class.
Although, you know, whether it's
It's good having new people in the class and you know, really, it makes